The twin suns bled over the horizon like two hearts that refused to die. Somewhere between their light, something fragile and furious began to breathe again. Naira Val ran through the burning glass dunes, her breath slicing the air like broken music. The desert shimmered around her, crimson light bending against dust storms, shards of crystal sand cutting at her legs. Every step felt like it was carving her name into the planet itself. Behind her, the sky trembled with the hum of engines. Hunters. Her pulse echoed inside her skull. The Zephyrian biosuit that once marked her as royal protection now hung in tatters, its silver fibers dulled by ash and sweat. Her sister's crest had been torn away days ago. All that remained was a streak of blood across her shoulder and the faint glow of a data key pressed to her palm. Inside it pulsed the truth, the Dominion's lie, the betrayal that shattered empires. The air was poison and gold. Naira's lungs burned as she stumbled down a ridge, her vision blurring under the double sunfire. She could almost hear Varine's voice whispering from the wind. "You were never meant to rule. You were meant to serve." That voice had ordered the hunt. That voice had promised a reward for her corpse. Her bare feet struck molten sand. Pain burst through her body as something hissed from beneath the dunes. A razor-scaled crawler, coiling and striking faster than thought. Fangs pierced her thigh, venom flooding her veins. She screamed once, sharp and short, before the desert swallowed the sound. The world tilted. "It's too bright. It burns," she whispered, collapsing beside a cracked ridge of black glass. The toxins spread like fire, racing toward her heart. Her fingers slipped from the data key. Her vision tunneled to white. Then, a shadow. He appeared through the storm like a memory that didn't belong to this world. A man in sand-stained armor, a scarf of burnt red wrapped around his neck. The outline of a rifle strapped to his back, a faint hum of human tech glinting at his wrist. His eyes were steady, sea gray against the endless amber light. Reese Calder, last survivor of the Terran vessel Argent Wind, had been searching for water and signal strength when he saw her fall. For a heartbeat, he thought she was a mirage. Too beautiful, too strange to be real. But the blood was real, the wound was real, and so was the desperate rise and fall of her chest. He knelt beside her, scanning with a handheld med scanner, venom reading off the scale. "Damn," he muttered, already unsealing a pack from his belt. His voice was low, rough, but there was something gentle behind it, like he'd spoken to dying stars before and learned how to whisper them back to life. He tore a strip from his undershirt and tied a tourniquet above her wound. "Stay with me, whoever you are," he said softly. The scanner beeped in warning. No time for anti-venom, improvisation, or death. Reese pulled a small knife, sterilized it with a pulse of his suit's plasma torch, and pressed it against her skin. The flesh hissed, the venom hissed louder. He cut shallow, careful, drawing the dark toxin into a field jar before sealing it away. Naira's body convulsed once, her throat catching on a breath that sounded like lightning. When he finished, his hand shook. Not from fear, but from the weight of what he'd just done. He looked at her again. Her skin wasn't human. It shimmered like frost glass, veins luminous with violet light. Her hair, a pale halo of silver, floated with static in the hot wind. Every part of her looked impossible, beautiful, wrong. "You're Zephyrian," he murmured. The name tasted like both awe and trouble. Her eyelids flickered. For a moment, her gaze met his. Those eyes, burning with bioluminescent teal, locking onto the face of the creature she'd been taught to despise. She saw the grit on his jaw, the scars along his neck, the heat-cracked lips. Not a soldier, a survivor. "Why me?" she croaked. "Why would a human save me?" He gave a half-smile, something small and tired. "Because I can." The storm howled above them, sweeping lines of sand across their bodies. He lifted her gently, careful of the wound, and carried her to the half-buried remains of his shuttle. The hull was cracked open like a dead animal, one engine still smoking faintly. Inside, the air was cooler, filtered through a struggling life support field. He laid her on a padded crate, wrapped a thermal blanket around her, and started a microfire unit near her feet. "You'll live," he muttered, mostly to himself. "You'd better." Hours passed. The desert calmed, the light turning from gold to deep blue. Through the fissured viewport, the twin moons rose like watchful eyes. Reese sat near her, adjusting the beacon that still refused to transmit. Each pulse of static reminded him that he was alone, light years from home, speaking to ghosts. Nayra stirred, her head turned slightly, the faintest tremor moving through her fingers. She whispered something in her native tongue, a phrase he didn't know, but he could feel its ache. He poured a few drops of purified water onto a cloth and pressed it to her lips. She drank barely, her breath trembling. "Rest," he said quietly. "You're safe for now." Her response was almost laughter. "Safe? On this world?" "Safer than being dead in the dunes." He leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed, the fire's orange light flickering against the steel. The smell of ozone and burned sand clung to everything. Outside, the wind sang across the dunes like a morning song. For the first time in days, Reese felt something shift inside him, an echo of the human stubbornness he thought he'd lost. This alien stranger, this living contradiction, had reignited the part of him that still cared whether someone else survived. And in her half-dreaming state, Nayra watched him through slitted eyes. The human's movements were precise, deliberate, filled with quiet focus. There was no cruelty there, no greed, none of what her people had described. Just will, just a strange warmth that made the venom in her veins slow its crawl. She wanted to ask his name, but exhaustion took her again. The last thing she felt was his hand adjusting the blanket, the whisper of his breath near her temple, saying something she almost didn't hear. "You're not dying on my watch." The night deepened, static flashed across the sky, painting the dunes in ghost light. The human and the alien slept under the same fractured heavens, two beings who should have never met, bound now by blood, danger, and a spark neither could explain. In the distance, the engines of hunting ships whispered through the dark. The Dominion was still searching. The sands of Orcs Nini shifted restlessly, waiting for dawn, waiting for whatever would come next. And somewhere within that waiting silence, something unseen began to bloom. Small, impossible, and alive. The first breath of a connection that would outlast war, venom, and the desert itself. The morning rose with a pale shimmer that turned the desert into liquid light. The twin suns were cruel again, painting the horizon in molten gold. But inside the broken hull of the crashed shuttle, the air was calm, filled with the soft hum of survival machines and the faint rhythm of breathing. Nayra's eyes opened slowly. For the first time in days, she felt the pulse in her veins steady, the poison no longer clawing at her heart. A thin film of condensation traced her cheek. The air filter had created a small oasis of clean moisture in the choking heat. She turned her head, every movement careful. The human was there, sitting cross-legged beside the emergency fire, adjusting a transmitter that sparked occasionally and died. He looked different in the light, less like a soldier, more like a man stitched together from sand and stubbornness. The red scarf around his neck was frayed, his armor scorched, his hands lined with dust and blood. Yet his eyes, when he noticed her stirring, softened with a quiet relief that almost disarmed her. "You made it through the night," he said. "Didn't think you'd have the strength." Her voice came out dry but steady. "You underestimate Zephyrians." He smiled faintly. "Guess I do." Name's Reese called her. "You?" She hesitated before answering. "Nayra Vol." The name felt heavier now, filled with everything she'd lost. The palace lights, the gardens of her homeworld, the sound of her sister's lies echoing across the halls. "Thank you," she added reluctantly, her tone edged with suspicion. "Don't thank me yet," Reese replied, turning the beacon upright. "We're still stuck on a planet that eats people for breakfast." Nayra tried to sit, but pain caught her leg like a blade. She winced, looking down at the bandages. The human's work was crude but effective. Her blood, pale blue and faintly luminous, had sealed around the wound. "You did this?" she asked quietly. He nodded once. "Didn't have a med station, so I used what I had. Venom was spreading fast. You were lucky I found you." She studied him for a moment. His tone carried no arrogance, only weary truth. "Humans don't usually rescue Zephyrians," she said, testing him. Humans don't usually meet Zephyrians who aren't trying to shoot them, he replied, still focused on the transmitter. Guess we're both breaking rules. The comment lingered in the air like smoke. Naira watched him work, his fingers deftly reconnecting circuits, his eyes narrowing when the device flickered again. There was a kind of rhythm in his persistence, the rhythm of someone who had lived too long on hope that never answered back. Outside, the glass dunes reflected sunlight in blinding arcs. The heat haze twisted shapes in the distance, shadows moving, or perhaps the remnants of her pursuers. Naira's breath caught. They'll track the energy signature from your crash. We can't stay here. Reese paused, looking up. You have a better idea? There's an abandoned outpost near the ridge of Kareth. Zephyrian miners built it before the Dominions sealed the zone. It might have shelter, maybe a transmitter strong enough to reach orbit. He studied her expression. You sure it's still there? I'm sure of nothing, she said bitterly, but it's better than waiting to be vaporized. Reese checked his sidearm, slung his pack over one shoulder, and handed her a hydration flask. Then we move at dusk. Until then, rest. She accepted the flask, but didn't drink right away. Why help me at all? He didn't answer immediately. He stood at the shattered viewport, staring into the bright emptiness. Because someone once helped me when they didn't have to, he said finally. If they hadn't, I wouldn't be here to make the same choice. There was something in the way he said it, simple, unpolished, yet bound with gravity. Naira looked at him differently then, as if seeing the outline of something rare in this dying world. When night came, the sky turned violet, stars burning sharp above the dunes. Reese packed what little they had, 2 canteens, a pulse pistol, and the cracked data key Naira had carried. He held it up to the light. Whatever's on this thing, worth dying for. It holds the Dominion's truth, she said, her voice hard. My sister forged treaties with slavers, sold human settlements for resources. If this reaches the neutral networks, the whole empire collapses. Then we'd better make sure it does. They stepped out into the cool night. The sand crunched softly under their boots. A pale mist drifted across the desert, whispering against their armor. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was alive, filled with the pulse of distant energy storms and the strange peace of shared danger. Hours passed in a blur of movement and faint starlight. Naira limped but refused to slow. Reese adjusted his pace not out of pity, but respect. When she faltered, he steadied her arm without a word. By midnight, they reached a cluster of ruined pylons marking the edge of the ridge. A faint blue glow shimmered across the horizon, residual radiation from old mining reactors. The wind carried metallic echoes. There, Naira whispered, pointing toward a collapsed dome half buried in sand. Sanctum Ridge Outpost. They descended into the ruins, every step careful. Inside, the air smelled of rust and ozone. Console lights flickered weakly, casting fractured patterns on the walls. Reese found a still-working power conduit and connected his field generator. The room brightened with a ghostly pulse. For a moment, it almost felt safe. Naira sank to the floor, exhaustion settling over her like a tide. Reese set a small thermal coil between them, the flame burning blue. Its reflection shimmered in her eyes like twin galaxies. You've been to this planet before, she said softly. He nodded, 5 years ago. Relief mission for stranded colonists after a Dominion bombing. We saved 20 before the sky burned. Lost everyone else. She studied his face, the way his jaw tightened at the memory. And you still came back? I didn't plan to, he admitted. Crashed during a patrol near the rings. Guess fate likes unfinished business. Or maybe your kind doesn't know how to quit, Naira said, half smiling. Maybe that's our flaw, he replied. Or our miracle. The fire hummed quietly between them. Outside, lightning crawled over the dunes like living veins. The desert glowed with silent violence. Yet in that small circle of light, 2 souls who should have been enemies found a strange, fragile stillness. Naira looked down at her hands, hands that had once held a crown, now shaking from fatigue. When I was young, I thought strength meant never needing help, she said, voice almost a whisper. Now I'm beginning to wonder if it means the opposite. Reese leaned back against the wall, eyes on the fire. Maybe strength isn't about standing alone. Maybe it's about who you stand with when the world tries to break you. The words lingered, warm and steady. She didn't answer, but her gaze softened, the glow of her skin reflecting the flame. For the first time since her exile, the ache in her chest eased. A sudden tremor rolled through the ground, shaking dust from the ceiling. Reese was on his feet instantly, scanning the horizon through the cracked window. Faint lights moved in the distance, hovercrafts gliding low, their engines humming like predators. "They found us," he said sharply. Naira gripped the wall, pushing herself upright despite the pain. "Then we move again." Reese loaded his weapon, eyes cold and focused. "Not tonight. The storm's coming. If we run, we'll die in it." "Then we fight? Then we endure," he said. The wind outside howled louder, carrying sparks of ionized dust that lit the night like fireflies. Naira's gaze met his across the flickering light. "You humans," she said softly. "You never stop believing you can survive anything." He smiled, tired but certain. "That's what makes us human." The storm gathered strength, whispering promises of chaos. Inside the ruined outpost, an alien and a human prepared for the kind of night that changes everything. Neither knew it yet, but before the next dawn, blood, lightning, and something dangerously close to love would bind them forever beneath the glass sky. The first rumble came from beneath the sand, deep and slow, like the heartbeat of the dying planet itself. The ground trembled under Naira's feet as the air thickened with static. Far across the ridge, flashes of violet lightning split the sky, painting the dunes in electric fire. Reese adjusted his visor, scanning the horizon through the swirling haze. "That's not weather," he muttered. "It's a plasma storm." "Biggest I've seen." Naira's luminous eyes narrowed. "The Dominion must have triggered it to flush us out. They'd rather burn the desert than let me reach the network." The air began to hum, charged with lethal energy. Winds whipped around the ruins, throwing shards of glass sand into the air like daggers. Reese grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the buried tunnels of the outpost. "We move now. If the radiation hits us here, we're ash." They ran through the collapsing corridors, the metal groaning above them. Lights flickered and died as magnetic surges ripped through the systems. Sparks showered their path. Naira stumbled once, her wounded leg faltering, but Reese caught her, steadying her without breaking stride. "Almost there," he shouted. They reached a reinforced hatch leading to the lower sector. Reese forced it open with a wrench of his exosuit, slamming it behind them as the storm roared overhead. Inside the narrow chamber, the temperature dropped suddenly. The faint glow of ancient consoles cast blue light across their faces. Naira leaned against the wall, panting. Her throat was dry, her hair plastered to her skin by heat and dust. "You risked your life again," she said between breaths. "Why?" Reese wiped sweat from his brow. "Because I don't quit halfway." Her lips curved faintly. "That stubbornness of yours, it's infuriating." He met her gaze, unflinching. "You're welcome." The storm above raged harder, the sound of it like a beast clawing at the sky. The outpost trembled, but held. For a brief moment, silence returned. Heavy, charged, full of unspoken thoughts. Reese activated a portable lamp. Its white glow fell over the chamber's central core. A massive terminal, half buried in dust, cables snaking across the floor like roots. The Zephyrian script on the panels pulsed faintly, ancient code still alive. Naira approached it with reverence. "This is a Dominion relay node," she whispered. "If it still functions, I can link the data key and broadcast the files to the neutral archives." Reese nodded. "Do it fast. Once they realize we're underground, they'll send ground troops." She pulled the crystalline data key from her belt and pressed it into the interface. The machine whirred, old circuits waking after decades of silence. Symbols streamed across the screen, glowing with power. "It's working," she murmured. "The truth will reach the stars." But then the unmistakable sound of engines thundered through the sand above them. Dropships. Multiple. The metal walls vibrated under the landing shockwaves. Reese cursed under his breath. "They're here." He loaded his rifle, checking the energy cell. "We hold them off as long as we can." Naira's hands trembled as she continued the upload. "If they destroy the relay before the transmission completes, all of this will be for nothing." He took position by the doorway, scanning the motion tracker on his wrist display. Red dots flickered. 8, then 12, closing fast. The first explosion tore through the upper level, raining dust and sparks. Soldiers in black Dominion armor stormed down the stairwell, plasma rifles glowing in the dark. Reese fired first, precision shots bursting against their shields. Nayra ducked behind the console, the relay humming like a living thing. Energy bolts ricocheted off the walls, the air filled with smoke and static. Reese moved with disciplined control, short bursts, efficient reloads, zero hesitation. A shot grazed his arm, but he didn't slow. "Keep up loading," he shouted. Nayra's pulse raced. Her fingers flew across the alien interface, rerouting power surges, overriding ancient locks. The machine resisted her like a living beast. "The data's nearly through," she cried out. A soldier broke through Reese's defense line, aiming straight for her. Before he could fire, Nayra raised her hand instinctively. Light burst from her palm, pure Zephyrian energy alive with electric fury. The blast hurled the attacker across the chamber, slamming him into the wall. Her breath caught. She hadn't used her abilities since exile. Reese turned, astonished. "Remind me not to make you angry." She almost smiled. "You wouldn't survive it." The ground shook violently as the storm reached its peak. Arcs of plasma surged through the walls, setting fire to broken cables. Reese reloaded, his armor scorched. He saw more troops outside, too many. "We can't hold them all," he warned. Nayra slammed her hand onto the final key. "Then we don't need to. It's done." The terminal flared bright, sending a beam of golden light through the ceiling, piercing the storm like a spear. The signal shot into the stratosphere, spreading across relay satellites, bouncing from moon to moon. The Dominion's crimes, their lies, their forged treaties, all broadcast to every corner of the system. Above, the soldiers hesitated as comm units filled with static. Their helmets buzzed with intercepted transmissions. Treason confirmed. High Council exposed. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Reese saw the shift and took the chance. "Move," he ordered. He grabbed Nayra's hand and pulled her toward the escape shaft. The relay behind them exploded in a burst of white heat as the overload consumed it. They stumbled into the open desert, coughing from smoke and dust. The storm had turned the sky into liquid light. Winds tore at their clothes and lightning danced across the dunes like wild serpents. Reese fell to one knee, clutching his side where a plasma round had grazed him earlier. Blood seeped through the fabric. Nayra dropped beside him, panic flashing across her features. "You're hurt." "Just a scratch," he said through gritted teeth. "You're lying." She pressed her glowing hands over the wound, channeling energy. The air shimmered as her power flowed into him. Pain seared through his nerves, then faded. When he opened his eyes again, she was pale, trembling. "You shouldn't waste your strength," he said softly. "It's not wasted," she whispered. "Not on you." The storm screamed above them and tearing the sky apart. Hovercrafts circled like vultures, but they hesitated, uncertain. The Dominion's chain of command was crumbling in real time. Across the planet, soldiers were receiving conflicting orders. Rebellion had begun. Nayra stood, helping Reese to his feet. In the distance, the horizon glowed faintly blue, dawn fighting its way through the storm. He looked at her, the strange alien light reflected in his gray eyes. "You just changed everything." She exhaled, her voice raw. "Not alone. You gave me something my people forgot existed. Faith. Faith in what? In the impossible." They started walking side by side across the trembling sands. Every step was heavy, but the storm behind them began to fade, dissolving into soft light. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Nayra said quietly, "You humans burn bright, even when the universe tries to snuff you out." Reese smiled faintly. "That's the trick. We shine best when everything else goes dark." The desert winds carried their words away, blending them into the echoing hum of a new dawn. The storm was dying, but something greater had just been born. A fragile alliance, a spark between species that no empire could erase. The horizon shimmered. Nayra glanced back once, seeing the relay's ruins buried beneath the rising sun. "The truth is free now," she whispered. Reese nodded. "Then so are we." The two silhouettes vanished into the golden light, walking toward whatever came next. Two survivors bound by war, fire, and something that neither of them could yet name. Dawn rose from the ashes of the storm. The twin suns broke through the scattered clouds, spilling molten light across the horizon. The dunes no longer burned. They shimmered, each grain of glass reflecting the color of rebirth. The desert that had tried to kill them now glowed like a promise waiting to be kept. Naira and Reese trudged along the cracked valley floor, their shadows long and sharp behind them. The wind had calmed, but the silence was heavy, filled with the ghosts of thunder still echoing somewhere beyond sight. Smoke from the wrecked Dominion ships coiled into the pale sky like the last breath of tyranny. Reese limped slightly, his ribs wrapped in bandage strips torn from his undersuit. The wound still hurt, but it no longer threatened his life. Naira walked close, steadying him when the sand shifted. Her skin caught the sunlight, dotting faint blue sparks. Every few steps she glanced back at the horizon, watching the pillars of smoke dissolve. "The message reached orbit," she said quietly. "The Dominion's encryption collapsed within minutes. Now every system knows what they did." Reese nodded, his voice rough from exhaustion. "And your sister?" Naira's gaze hardened. "She'll run." Power never stays to face its own reflection. They climbed a ridge overlooking the shattered plain. In the distance, a new shape cut across the horizon. Sleek, silver, unmistakably Zephyrian. Naira froze, scanning it through the haze. "That's her ship," she whispered. "Varine's flagship." Reese squinted. "Looks like she didn't run far." "She's coming for me." Naira's voice trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper. "She won't allow me to live after what I've done." Reese reached for his pulse rifle and checked the charge. "Then she's about to regret underestimating you." The wind rose again, carrying the scent of ozone. Naira turned to him. "You don't have to stay." "You've done enough. I made you a promise," he said simply, "and I don't break promises." She stared at him for a heartbeat longer, then nodded. The sun reflected in her eyes like molten silver. "Then we end it together." They moved quickly toward the wreck of a Dominion transport half buried in the dunes, its energy cells still pulsed faintly. Reese rewired the core, rerouting residual charge into the main cannon. "It's unstable," he said, his hands moving fast over the panel, "but it'll fire once before melting itself." "That's all we need." Naira activated her wrist module, summoning what remained of her bioarmor. Light enveloped her form, the Zephyrian sigils across her skin pulsing with renewed strength. She looked like a being made from both storm and grace. Minutes later, the flagship descended through the haze, its engines howling like a dying beast. Dust and heat rippled outward as it landed. The hatch opened, and from it emerged Varine, tall, regal, her armor a dark mirror of Naira's. Soldiers flanked her, their faces hidden behind helmets. Varine's voice cut through the wind like a blade. "Sister," she called, her tone smooth, almost kind. "You have caused quite the disturbance." Naira stepped forward, the sun gleaming on her armor. "You destroyed worlds for power. You betrayed every vow we ever made. You murdered our mother's legacy." Varine tilted her head, smiling faintly. "Our mother's ideals were weakness. Survival demands sacrifice. You never understood that." Reese stood beside Naira, rifle raised but silent. Varine's gaze flicked toward him, amusement glinting in her eyes. "Ah, the human. The infestation you chose over your own blood." Naira's voice sharpened. "He saved me when you sent death. He fought when your empire hid behind lies. If that makes him an infestation, then perhaps your world deserves to fall." Varine's expression hardened. "Then let it." She lifted her hand. "Kill them." The soldiers advanced, weapons humming. Reese fired first, a clean burst that dropped one immediately. Naira moved beside him, her energy whips igniting with a hiss that split the air. Blue arcs of plasma slashed across the sand, cutting through armor like paper. The desert erupted in chaos, light and dust, screams swallowed by thunder. Reese rolled behind the wreck, firing precise shots that burst against helmets and shields. Naira's movements were fluid, her body glowing brighter with every strike. She fought like the storm that birthed her, graceful and terrifying. But Varine was no ordinary foe. She stepped into the fray, her own energy crackling with crimson light. Her whip met Naira's midair, the clash sending a shockwave that flattened dunes for meters around. The sisters circled each other, eyes locked, mirrors of fury and loss. "You could have ruled beside me," Vereen hissed, striking again. "I would rather die free than reign in your shadow," Nera spat back, countering the blow. Their weapons tangled, sparks dancing between them. Every impact echoed like thunder. Rhys tried to close in, but the energy waves threw him back. The ship's cannon behind him began to whine, the charge building faster than expected. "Nera!" he shouted over the noise. "The core's going critical." Vereen lunged, blade aimed for Nera's heart. Nera twisted, the strike grazing her shoulder. Pain flared, but she didn't falter. She caught her sister's wrist and turned the momentum, driving both of them to the ground. Rhys staggered to his feet, blood dripping down his arm. He saw the power core's reading spike red. One more surge and it would detonate. He sprinted to the controls, overriding the failsafe. "Get clear," he yelled. Nera looked up from the sand, eyes wide. "You'll die." "Not if you run now." Vereen's laughter cut through the chaos. "He can't save you, Nera. Humans always die first." Nera's fury ignited. She pushed off the ground, channeling everything she had left. Light burst from her body, pure, blinding, endless. She slammed both palms against her sister's chest, unleashing a wave of energy so fierce it shattered armor and sky alike. Vereen screamed as the blast consumed her, her figure dissolving into the storm of light. The flagship behind her crumbled under the force. Nera collapsed to her knees, every nerve burning. Rhys reached her, pulling her close as the ship's cannon howled. The air vibrated with the rising pitch of destruction. "Hold on," he shouted, activating his shield field. The explosion tore through the valley like the breath of a god. Fire and glass rose together, forming a dome of white heat that swallowed the world. For a moment, there was nothing but light, endless, consuming, pure. Then silence. When the light faded, the desert lay transformed. The wreckage was gone, replaced by a vast crater of glowing sand, molten and still. The air shimmered with residual energy, painting everything in hues of gold and blue. Rhys stirred, his shield cracked but intact. Nera lay in his arms, her pulse faint but steady. Her hair drifted across his chest like silver threads. Slowly her eyes opened. "Is it over?" she whispered. He nodded. "It's over." She smiled weakly. "You humans, you never stop surviving." "Neither do you," he said softly. They sat in silence, watching the new dawn climb the edge of the crater. The world seemed reborn, fragile yet alive. Later, when the suns reached their peak, Rhys built a beacon from the fragments of his armor. Its signal pulsed upward, steady and strong. Help would come. Human ships, rebel fleets, the first wave of a new alliance born from truth and blood. Nera stood beside him, leaning slightly, her balance not yet returned. "When they ask who started this," she said, "what will you tell them?" Rhys smiled faintly. "That a human crashed into destiny, and an alien princess showed him how to make it mean something." Her laughter was soft, carried away by the wind. "Then maybe hope was never ours alone to keep." The suns lowered once more, staining the sky in amber. Together they walked across the ridge, two silhouettes bound by survival, and something deeper, something that neither empire or storm could ever unmake. Behind them, the desert whispered again, no longer with death, but with the quiet hum of life returning. Hope had found its home in the ashes of war, and for the first time in centuries, the world of Orcs 9 knew peace.